First game we're going to talk about is New Super Mario Bros. Unfortunately, I also won't be able to show any gameplay on screen for any of these games because Nintendo has been seemingly a little picky about that again recently. Not exactly sure why. I've heard some things in the news, just I don't want to risk anything. But New Super Mario Bros., which isn't exactly new at this point since the game released in 2006, is, you know, it's your traditional lovely 2D Mario platformer. You're going to be running, jumping through the levels, hitting question blocks, getting mushrooms, grabbing fire flowers, and it's a very charming game. There's 6 worlds that you can go through by default, but then there's 2 that you can unlock for a total of 8 worlds, and of course there's all sorts of different challenges and secret levels and toad houses and such that I won't spoil. I'll let you find for yourself as you play the game, but I would highly recommend this one. This is one of my favorite games on the DS, but also just one of my favorite Mario games and one of my favorite 2D platformers in general. If you're gonna pick up any game, I would say that this is like the definitive game where it's like, when I think DS, this is the first game that comes to mind, so I'd highly recommend picking this one up. Now, in total, we're going to be talking about 10 games. That was the first one, obviously, and these aren't like, oh, the 10 best DS games of all time or the 10 best selling. These are just 10 that I wanted to point out, so then you had a variety of games to choose from. You have some puzzle games, some visual novel games, some more kiddie games, some platformers, some racing games, just a bit of variety, while also picking games that I feel like really show the strengths of the DS, both in casual senses and in more advanced gamer senses. So the first one we talked about, again, being New Super Mario Bros. Next up, I want to talk about Mario Kart DS. If you haven't played Mario Kart DS before, that either means that you didn't have any friends when you were younger, which, hey, that's completely okay, because for me, it was vice versa, where, you know, some people don't have friends as kids, but then they get friends later on. For me, I had plenty of friends when I was younger, but now I'm an adult and I don't have any friends, so it's all good. Mario Kart DS, though, was the first handheld, truly 3D Mario Kart game. Sure, we had, you know, Mario Kart on the GBA, and it was sort of pseudo 3D, but no. This is full 3D models and everything like that, and arguably, to some people, is the best Mario Kart game of all time. For me, I can't choose a favorite Mario Kart just because they're all so great in their own ways. Like, I love Double Dash for certain reasons, I love 8 and 7 for certain reasons, I love DS for certain reasons, but I would say that is definitely the most nostalgic one for me, for sure. Next up, I want to recommend Scribblenauts, which is another really nostalgic game for me. It's a lot of fun, but this game is so cool. So essentially, if you guys have ever played the game or heard of Drawn to Life, it's sort of like that, but different. It's like a similar concept to where in Drawn to Life, you draw things and, oh yeah, they come to life. They become a part of the game. But Scribblenauts, instead of that, you write things. So you know, you have this notepad you pull up and you say, okay, I want a gun. You just type gun, click the enter button, and a gun will just fall from the air and your character can run around with it. Or I want a fire truck. You put in fire truck, a fire truck will spawn. You want a tree, that'll spawn. And there's like literally hundreds, if not thousands of objects that you can summon in. And it's just this incredible sandbox. I remember when I was younger, I had this time where I was like, okay, you know what? I want to set up like a literal like game inside of this game. So I created a tower defense where I built up like an entire station. I had like guns and turrets and like other, you know, like police officers alongside of me. And then I spawned in a bunch of zombies and monsters right outside of this building that I summoned in. And I was like, all right, let's see how long everybody can survive before we all just, you know, die. And it was absolute chaos, and I loved every second of it. And that's the best part. It isn't just like, oh, it's some one-off thing, or, you know, because there is like a story mode you can go through, but there is also just like, you know, like the sandbox element too, where you can just go in and it's like, you know, it isn't even like scripted or anything like that. Like, again, there is single player missions which are kind of scripted, but you have that sandbox where it doesn't have to be scripted. You can just do stuff like that, and it's just a part of the game. Like, it was so advanced for the time, and even now it's like mind-blowing. Next up, I wanted to highlight Neo: The World Ends With You, which is a game that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about, but it is an absolutely fantastic RPG, which has been ported to other consoles like, you know, the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation, for example, but I truly do feel like it is at home on the Nintendo DS with the way that it utilizes both of the screens. And you're going to be like, you know, when you're in combat, for example, like you'll be bouncing between the top and the bottom screen, and the story truly just, it resonated with me in a way that I literally cannot explain in words, and I feel like a lot of you will be able to resonate with this story as well. So again, this is one that I really don't want to say too much about just because it is an absolutely fantastic game. You know, with it being an RPG, it is definitely a bit longer. It isn't like Persona lengths, like 100+ hours, but I want to say it'll take you maybe like a, you know, a couple dozen hours. It is an absolutely fantastic game, and I cannot recommend it enough. And even if you don't plan to buy a DS, make sure you get on one of the other consoles at least, just so you can at least experience Princess story. It is absolutely fantastic. Next up, I want to recommend Pokemon Black and White. I mean, if you played Pokemon before, or if you've been thinking about getting into the series, I would say that if you've played Pokemon before, there's a chance that you've already played this game, unless you're a younger gamer that wasn't there when these games released, in which case, I pity you if you do decide to pick up these games, because they are rather expensive nowadays, which does kind of tie into the modding thing, where it's like, hey, you can either fork out all the money to get these games, or you could maybe invest in some other things, which we're not going to talk about in this video, because again, I don't want Nintendo knocking on my door tomorrow. There is cheaper ways to acquire these games, but, you know, if you want to get it officially, you know, that's always an option too. But whether you are a younger gamer that maybe just simply missed that era of Pokemon Black and White, in which case, I kind of feel bad for you, because that was a really special era for Pokemon. Just, I don't know, again, it's super nostalgic for me, but the love in the air when Pokemon Black and White released, everybody picking up the game, and even though we already had a Pokemon generation on the DS, I don't know, Black and White was just that era where it's like, it was that point where everybody had a DS, everybody was there playing it, you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't escape it at school, the library, the grocery store. You always saw a kid playing Pokemon Black and White, it seemed like, on their Nintendo DS. But even without that social factor, it's still an absolute blast to just play by yourself, obviously. Like, even to this day, I constantly go back, pop in my copy of Pokemon Black, just because that's the version I went with, and I absolutely love that game. There's also Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 if you want to get those as well, but yeah, you can't go wrong with either version. Just an absolutely fantastic Pokemon generation. Next up, I wanted to recommend LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. As I mentioned before, I wanted to have a variety of games on here, and this is, you know, it's like a classic LEGO game where it's like sort of like a 3D puzzle action platformer of sorts. It heavily leans into like the collect-a-thon side of things as you're collecting all these different studs and mini kits and trophies and going through the levels and replaying through the events of Star Wars episodes 1 through 6. Star Wars The Complete Saga, it is one of my favorite LEGO games and one of my favorite games of all time. Whether we're talking about the console version or the DS version, I put tons of hours into that game back in the day and 100%ed it multiple times across multiple save files. I love LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. I cannot recommend it enough. Next up, we're going to talk about Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which is unlike the console counterparts. I've also talked about this game many times on the channel before. Unlike the console versions, which is, you know, like a 3D beat-em-up adventure game of sorts, you know, level-based. You go through each level playing as each of the Spider-Man. It's sort of the same thing on the Nintendo DS where, you know, it is still technically level-based and you're playing as the different Spider-Man. But instead, here, instead of it being like a 3D adventure game, beat-em-up, whatever, it's actually like a 2D Metroidvania on DS, and it is one of my favorite Metroidvanias of all time. It is so well done. It is such an amazing game. It is super addictive. It's one of those games where you're going to pick it up, and I promise you, you're probably not going to put it down until you beat it. It's not a very long game. I mean, it might still take you like a day or two to get through, just because there is a lot to chew on there if you decide to explore all the environments, go for all the upgrades, and really see things through, play through the different modes and challenges you can unlock. And man, if you do try to go through 100% of the game and, you know, play through all the challenges and all the different modes, like the arcade mode and the boss rush mode, and then play around with the alternate costumes and do all the unlockables, yeah, you'll definitely get a good couple dozen hours out of this game. It is an absolutely fantastic experience. There's even like cutscenes and stuff like that in the game and a bunch of dialogue, and I cannot recommend it enough. An absolutely fantastic and very nostalgic game for me. The next stuff I want to talk about is Kirby Squeak Squad. You know, it's a classic Kirby adventure. If you played Return to Dreamland or just normal Dreamland on the Game Boy before, you know what you're getting into. It's a 2D Kirby platformer, but, you know, it's like one of the main ones that was released for the DS, and I've always just really loved this one. You know, you're going after the Squeak Squad, as the name would imply, but there's just something about Kirby. Every time that I play a Kirby game, there's an undeniable charm to it, between the music and just, you know, just how happy and fluffy and cute that Kirby is doing all the little dances and such. There's just so much charm there, and Kirby Squeak Squad captures that perfectly, and it does have some pretty cool utilizations of the, you know, the dual screen and touchscreen setup, so I can highly recommend Kirby Squeak Squad. Absolutely love that game. Next up, I wanted to highlight Animal Crossing Wild World, which was like the Animal Crossing game for the Nintendo DS, and I absolutely adore this game. It is basically, it's very similar to what we got on the GameCube with the first Animal Crossing. It's basically just like that in terms of like the graphical fidelity, at least, you know, just the aesthetic of it, where it's a bit more low poly, yet it's still like actually 3D. And Animal Crossing Wild World is one of those games where I can always go back to it, and even beyond the nostalgic charm of it all, it is just so relaxing and so much fun going into that game, going into that world. You know, you're talking to all the different villagers in the town, carrying out all your tasks, getting into the routine of checking back every day to see what's in the shop, what all you need to take care of. I absolutely adore Animal Crossing Wild World, and despite the fact that we've had many Animal Crossing games since then, like New Horizons and New Leaf and all that, I still feel like there's plenty of charm and reason to go back and play some of these older games, like the first one on GameCube, or specifically Wild World here, like we're talking about on the Nintendo DS. It is an absolutely fantastic game. It's one of those games where if I'm having a bad day, or it doesn't matter if I'm having a good day, bad day, sad day, whatever it is. If I'm in a good mood, it'll just make me feel even better. If I'm stressed out, it'll calm my anxiety, and if I'm sad, it'll make me smile again. I love Animal Crossing Wild World. It is for some reason I can't say that title today. Animal Crossing Wild World. I don't know why it's so hard for me to say, but fantastic game. And finally, I wanted to talk about one that's very different from literally any of the other games we talked about here, and that is Ace Attorney Trilogy. Now, this is the first time that this game was actually available in America. It was technically available on the Game Boy Advance, but only in Japan, but then finally on the DS, we got the whole trilogy here on DS, and surprisingly, even though it was a GBA game, it utilizes the touchscreen and dual screen setup very well. Now, again, this is like a visual novel of sorts, but it isn't like your typical visual novel where you're just be like reading it for most of the time. It's actually very interactive and can get very intense, especially once you're in like the court hearing sessions and just hitting the button, objection. I'm telling you, like when you're actually there in the moment and you're trying your hardest to win that case and prove that your client is innocent, oh my goodness, those, like, the amount that my heart races is equivalent to when you get that last second kill in D&D. When you know when the enemy is on the bomb, they're just about to defuse it, and you're about to lose the last round, and that last round is going to be the one that makes you lose the game. Last second, you throw that tomahawk, you don't know if it's gonna land, your heart's pounding, it's like, if this misses, my team's gonna hate me, we're gonna lose, but then it smacks him right in the skull, and you just get that immediate feeling of satisfaction. That's how it feels to win a case in Ace Attorney Trilogy. I am not even kidding. This game is absolutely fantastic, and again, even though it's a visual novel, it is very interactive and a very innovative spin on the classic visual novel formula, and even though it was a GBA game originally, it is absolutely fantastic and quite at home on the DS and the DS Lite and DSi and DSi XL. The game is also available on other platforms nowadays like the Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox, but again, we're talking about the DS today, so that's another game that I could highly recommend. Now, beyond that, that is 10 games. So just to do a very brief recap, we talked about New Super Mario Bros., Mario Kart DS, Scribblenauts, Neo The World Ends With You, Pokemon Black and White, LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, Kirby Squeak Squad, Animal Crossing Wild World, and Ace Attorney Trilogy. I hope that this helps somebody out there.